items. My name is Gil Rogers. I'm the Executive Vice President at Platform Q Education. I will be facilitating and moderating the conversation today. As I mentioned, we have some great panelists that are joining us to share their insights, and I'll have them introduce themselves in a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webcast is being recorded, and for Platform Q Education partners will be available in your dashboard shortly after the presentation today. We're also streaming live to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter via Periscope. So they're available on those platforms as well. But stay here, participate in the conversation. We've got a live chat going off to the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to hop in there, introduce yourself to everyone who's in attendance, join that conversation, share your thoughts there as well. You'll also see a question and answer box below the presentation screen within the Conduit platform. So if you have questions for us and our panelists, we're going to leave some time toward the end. I'll moderate those questions and field those to the group. The other way to participate, if you are of the tweeting variety, feel free to hop on your Twitter machine and use the Into the Unknown hashtag that you see on the slide on the screen. That'll be a great way to participate in the conversation as well. So that's all the do's and don'ts and the welcomes. I'm going to kick it over to Alora to get us started with some introduction. So Alora, where you're from, where you work, all that good stuff, and share something interesting about you or something new that you've discovered that you want to share with the group.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Alora Thomas, and I serve currently at the University of Missouri, Kansas City as the Interim Director of Admissions. I've been there for a little over 4 years, almost 5 years. That time has gone by really fast. And we joined Platform Q, March of 2019. So fantastic relationship and learning a lot and being strategic about how we work with students just makes my work exciting. Something interesting about myself, I have seen Frozen 1 and 2 probably combined, each one more than 100 times because I have a 4-year-old. So I could put the movie for you if you needed me to. Just let me know. If you want to talk about the Samantha scenes, I've got it covered.
Hi, everybody. Andy Colombo. I'm AVP for Enrollment and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Mass. I've been there for almost 5 years, and we joined Platform Q, I'm assuming, along with quite a few others in the first couple weeks of the pandemic. So right after we went remote, we partnered with Platform Q. And we were talking about what are things we've done before we started this. What are things we've done a lot more of during the pandemic than before? For me, it's changing diapers. We just had a child in the midst of the pandemic. Quite interesting. So we have a 2-month-old at home, so that is keeping me busy right now.
Congratulations.
Wow, congratulations. That's so sweet.
Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn DeYoung. I serve as the Senior Associate Director of Admissions for Recruitment and Communications at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I had my 5-year COVID anniversary here in my kitchen alone. 5 years at the University of Washington, 17 years working at 3 different institutions in the Pacific Northwest. And yes, I like wine. You can see my wine behind me, my wine wreaths and decorations here that I use the corks for. But I've also been doing a lot more running. And although I haven't seen Frozen, my favorite run instructor on the Peloton app always talks about running into your unknown and pushing your limits. So I'm excited to be here today to talk about that.
If you didn't like wine and you had all that wine decor, I think there'd be a little bit of a problem that we have to discuss. I don't know if you all know this, but this is a trick, Alora. Your job for the next 55 minutes is to just sing every Frozen song back to back and back. So we will just wait quiet now. So yeah, hopping into it, and I think Jocelyn, you gave us a really good kind of starting off point. Like I mentioned, at least at Platform Q, we saw 2,000 or more admitted student programs between April and May, and we alongside our partners learned a lot when it came to what worked and what didn't. I think one of the main common themes, and we'll talk about this a lot today, is you can't just replicate an in-person event online. We have to think differently about what that experience is. So I think to start us, we were talking a little bit as we were preparing for the webinar. Alora, you're the elder stateswoman of the group with respect to your partnership with Platform Q. We'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about what results you've seen, what you were doing pre-pandemic, and how, for your instance, how the pandemic has changed your perspective, and then let's go in the circle the same way we did with intros, with that kind of a theme, pre-pandemic, and then what you did during, and then we'll talk a little bit about your plans from there.
Perfect. So we joined Platform Q late March of 2019, and we knew that this was a great way for us to start yielding students and connecting with our admitted students. And so we signed, and a week later we were live with webcast, pulling together, redecorating our offices, getting things set up for backgrounds. When we found the data from the students we were able to engage with in the spring and summer, when we checked our data for fall, 100% of the students, they were able to engage with us in a virtual webcast or a chat enrolled in our institution. So we knew that they were engaging with us. And one unique part I found is we had a student, I was able to go through the data and look through the chats and the webcast, and one student came to every single one of our webcasts, never talked, never asked questions, but she enrolled at UMKC. So that was outstanding. Then COVID happened. So we were a little bit ahead of the game in knowing how to prepare, what we needed to do. But again, what does that look like now? So our admitted day students events that we normally have 300 to 400 people couldn't have. So we moved that online, moved it to Platform Q, and had breakout sessions. It was well attended. We actually were able to have one of our admitted student days in person, and then we had the virtual. We had higher attendance virtually than we did in person, which is pretty cool for us to experience. But we also realized moving forward that this is going to have to be a little bit different by taking that data and how long the students were engaged in that event day that we had planned.
Oh, Andy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I've got kids in the background singing Into the Unknown. So
there you go.
Prior to the pandemic, WPI had a pretty traditional approach. So we didn't have virtual events set up. We had been on the cusp of looking into things like chatbot, but really had not dipped our toes into the water of virtual events. That changed pretty rapidly. All of our admitted student events are in April, and so we went fully remote March 13th. So we had to pretty quickly pivot and transition to virtual events, and it was critical for us. We typically see about 40% of our admitted students attend an on-campus event, and we typically have a yield rate between 60-70%. So they're big events for us, and we were a little concerned about how we're gonna plug the gap there, and so we did a range of things, but virtual events were a hit for us. As we look back at the data, we held a lot of different offerings, different types of offerings for students on the platform. We really tried to figure out how do we condense 6 to 7 hours and distill down to the 2 or 3 critical things that students need in a much briefer time period. And so the stats suggest, it's been a win for us. We had, I'd say, about 50% of students who participated in a virtual event yielded, and we had some really high volume in terms of students participating. 27% of our students participated in, up to 10 events. We had another 20% participating in 11 to 20 events, and 7% of our students actually engaged more than 50 times. So there was a little bit for everyone. Some folks who just wanted to get 1 or 2 questions answered, and others who really wanted to dive in and get as much exposure as possible.
Wow. Similarly, at the University of Washington, we were in a very traditional in-person kind of yield strategy approach pre-pandemic. We did admitted student information sessions. We have over 30,000 visitors that make it through the Welcome Center every year. So having people set foot on campus is really mission critical to our yield strategy. Admitted student previews, we plan to have 3 this year. and had capacity for up to 10,000 people to join us on one particular day. We also did receptions around the West and throughout the state of Washington, and did a little bit of paid advertising on social. So that was kind of our spring yield strategy. Enter COVID-19, and that quickly exposed the gaps in our strategy. We didn't have that virtual engagement set up, and so we quickly, I hate to use the term pivoted because I feel like we're all using that, but we quickly pivoted to identify vendors that could support that digital engagement. So we didn't have a virtual tour at the time. We didn't have a self-guided tour. We were able to renew our guidebook contract and get our self-guided tour back up. We partnered with Platform Q to get that branded experience. We didn't want to just use Zoom. We wanted that experience to look and feel like University of Washington. That's a big part of our strategy, is the brand. And because time was a constraint, we literally just took what we were doing in person and we plopped it online. And we'll talk more about maybe moving forward and what we would do differently for the fall. But I think that's important to note that we just tried to replicate that experience, and we learned a lot from it. On the positive side, pulling the data, we actually doubled the number of students that we saw in the virtual space versus in person, year-over-year comparison. And we did see about a 2% increase in yield of those students who participated in the in-person event last year versus the digital. So I guess I said that backwards. I think you know what I meant. We saw an increase because of the digital engagement. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
That's extremely helpful to hear from all of you, and it's interesting to kind of understand. So one of the things, Andy, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. You mentioned, you didn't want to replicate you knew you couldn't do the 6-hour in-person program in a virtual space. How do you prioritize your content at that point then, with what you want your audience to see, and from obviously competing priorities with people on campus wanting to be showcased, and how you set up that type of an agenda? Can you share a little bit about your program and what that was structured as? Because what I'm getting at is, as we think about the fall, we're going to want to apply some of those lessons from a content perspective for sure, and I think that would provide some good insight.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really positive things about the university response to the pandemic, like many institutions, our president was holding regular town halls with the full community, sort of webinar style question and answer. And so many people would hop in the chat and say, I want to help recruit students. I want to help bring in the class. And it wasn't always the people you'd think of that would be helpful, but I think just in terms of the community desire to bring in the class, was a real positive. And then the challenge, of course, was trying to figure out what of those 6 to 7 existing hours of content do we drill down to? What are the critical decision points or piece of information or experiences that students need to make that decision? And so for us, it came down to, faculty interaction and academic content was one. Student engagement, peer-to-peer, was another. And finally, I think even more important than in typical years was the opportunity for students and their families to engage with campus administrators who would be overseeing not just their transition during this pandemic to college years, but really helping to craft a community for them over the next 4 years. And so, we offered those. So each academic major had a pre-recorded session. We chose to do that just to limit the technical challenges and also allow for faculty to be engaging people in the chat. So these sort of simulated live presentations, if you're someone who sits down and wants to watch the full presentation and ask questions, you had that opportunity. If you're someone who had 5 minutes, wanted to hop in, get your questions asked and answered, you had that opportunity as well. So we try to be as flexible as possible with how we were addressing people's questions. And I think that the flexibility and also just the breadth of programming that we offered was a positive for our students.
That's awesome. And one of the, I was talking to someone earlier today about, there's obviously the pandemic has provided a lot of challenges for a lot of people on a number of fronts, not just enrollment and admissions, but our campuses, our families, outside, everything else. And we need to think about that. But I think one of the positive side effects is people coming together to help each other and to support each other. And one of the challenges, I think, as we head to the fall is different priorities are going to pull people in other directions, right? Whereas in the spring, it was kind of all hands on deck from marketing and IT and admissions, kind of working together with a lot of these things. IT needs to be supporting faculty and instructional technology and all the things for the enrolling students if you have distance education. So it's really about having the kind of strategy that, from an enrollment perspective, you can manage and run, right? And so, Alora, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit to talk. You've been running programs for pretty consistently. And if I look at the infographic that we published earlier this week, and I'm going to put my staff on the spot and ask you to throw it in the chat on the side of the screen, throw it up on Twitter for anybody who's following us in that way. But the top content that we saw from our events in the spring were admitted student panels, and then, to Andy's point, academic success sessions and program and major spotlights, which oftentimes featured faculty and administrators, right? And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your continuous strategy and the content that you put together, and how that's going to lead, how maybe some lessons learned over the summer are going to dictate some of the things that you do as you head into the fall.
Yes, like was said earlier, we had to take some of our admitted day events and tailor that to what a large event in person, like our preview day, what we're calling Discover UMKC days, where students are going to want to engage necessarily for 3 hours, but a 3-hour in-person event, you can't move that into a virtual setting, a webinar. So we've taken that day and spread it out into a week. So the students that we felt that content is going to be necessary, that highlights our faculty, our financial aid and scholarships office, current students, we've kind of broken that up into a week for them to be able to engage with us. But what we learned this summer is students are watching the content at 11 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning. I love data, and the data shows that they're watching, and it's not necessarily when you're live. And so that's what's great about working with campus partners and ensuring that students have access to the information. And it's when we are available, so we can pre-record it where it comes across live, and they can come in and someone can still chat. Something else we were able to implement is our chat features on our website. A lot of our academic units and some of our enrollment management teams now have chat widgets on their website, so students can go in and ask the questions live. So it's not just our admissions counselors that are feeding those questions and having to reach out. The student can get contacted directly to that academic unit or that campus department. So I think we turned some of that data into what do we do now with these students? And so we adjusted our hours. So we used to live at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock Central Time, and now we push that back to 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock Central Time, because we know they're sitting in now online class all day from 8 to 2, 8 to 1:30, and they're not ready to have content between 4 and 5. They need that break. So again, being able to take some of that data and turn it into how you make adjustments for all. And like we said earlier, taking an in-person event and moving it strictly into a webcast or virtual event is not going to be successful for everyone. You got to figure out what parts are going to work.
Yeah, and you boil down that 6-hour day into 30 minutes, right? And you learn really fast what's the content that we present for ourselves versus what the students actually want and need, right? And so to that point, Jocelyn, I mean, you had I've got a question from the audience here. I'm going to pull this in from the question and answer now. Eric had a question. Congrats on boosting yield in unprecedented times. Hearing several colleges and universities in their year-over-year undergrad apps are up for fall 21. And I've heard that as well. I have a number of partners that are seeing they're up in applications for next fall. What is, and we'll start with you, but we'll go through the group. Your take on kind of these counterintuitive achievements in such a weird time.
It's so funny. In our team meeting this morning, I was sharing I was going to be doing this today, and I pulled the data. And I have to be really candid and say that yes, we saw an increase in yield, but we have a really strong brand, and I just say that to be clear. We're in a unique position compared to some other institutions, and I just want to be, candid about that. We also did some things differently with who we admitted. So we were looking at major and trying to shape the class a little bit more. We also knew we were entering a pandemic, and so we were a little more aggressive with offers with students who otherwise would have been. And so, as we all know with data, there's so many factors that go into the numbers and then the output. I think that's worth sharing. Going into the fall, though, in terms of we haven't opened our application yet, so I can't really comment on year-over-year comparison numbers, but we've been down in application numbers over the last 2 years. And it's been moderate, I mean, not like substantially, but it has been shrinking slightly. So.
But looking at those numbers, for me, it's always about conversion and yield at that point, right? If you have less inquiries and less applications, but you convert more of them and yield more of them, then it comes out and it's a stronger strategy at that point. So to be able to see that is pretty amazing. Andy, have you seen any thoughts on that, on application counts and what we should be thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, we're up early, but at least at WPI, although I think nationally, the process is so deadline driven. I would hesitate to take any insights from early activity, which we know strongly correlates with the most affluent families, the students who have had the most preparation, and those students likely are probably thinking about continuing to apply early at higher rates, as we've seen is the trend nationally over the past 5-10 years. So I think it's far too early, especially when so many families that I've heard from as we do panels like this, or as we're fielding calls and emails. So many people with seniors or seniors themselves feel that they're behind in the process right now. And so I think that we're going to see different populations are going to behave differently. And that's true of different institutions as well, right? There are certain things that colleges are doing. We went from, having 1,000 plus test optional schools to almost 1,500 in a matter of weeks. So, a lot of these schools, they might have had students waiting to complete standardized test scores, and the College Board and ACT have helped us out because there really aren't tests to take. I think that some of this is sort of the response to COVID, the macro level issues that are bubbling up, and then some of it is people responding to what's happening out there. Maybe some folks decided to use some of their pandemic downtime in the summer to work on applications. Others are worried about early decisions. So I think at least at WPI, the numbers are so small. Really, I couldn't tell you any real indications until the last 72 hours prior to my first early deadline. And that's just how the application behavior has been at WPI for years.
Got it. Laura, anything else to add to that?
No, very similar response to Andrew. It's a little too early for us to decide, but I know definitely with the test optional, and UMKC went test optional in January of 2020, and will stay that way. And I can tell you that's definitely going to change the structure and how the timeline for students applying, because now they don't have to worry about it. But it's early to make a clear indication of what it is.
Yeah, I think the general theme to think about is, and I'm going to borrow words from your friend down the road, Laura, Dixie Williams from University of Missouri St. Louis. We were on a call with her a couple weeks ago, and maybe she's in the chat through who you are in the chat and that sort of stuff. But she kind of coined it as we're in a perpetual yield cycle, right? And so no matter where we are, whether it's early applications or fast forward in a few months, and we're talking about bringing in our admitted students, and then we're talking about getting those students to enroll and orientations and all those sorts of things. Every event is a yield event now, right? And so I think we need to think about that from a content planning perspective. So in that vein, I'm actually going to pivot the conversation a little bit. Let's see if we can all say pivot once. Someone's got to post the image of Ross from Friends yelling pivot on Twitter now. So there's some data that we derive from the infographic that I mentioned. I'd love your thoughts on with some of these. Generally speaking, we say shorter content is better when we're talking with the student audience. The average view time of live content in the spring was about 30 minutes. That to me is an interesting number. And Jocelyn, I'd let you're already kind of nodding there on that. What are your thoughts on that, and how that'll translate into our fall plan? Because the whole point of this is our lessons from the spring, how we apply this to the fall. What are your thoughts on that data nugget with your experience?
Yeah, that was actually a shock even for spring. I mean, we're talking admitted students who are theoretically more interested in our institution. So 30 minutes is a long time, knowing Gen Z, their, attention span is shorter, right? So when we think about fall, practically speaking, I don't see 30 minutes, especially when they're in Zoom and Teams classrooms, right? So what we've been doing at the University of Washington is we have our 30-minute, 30-minute general admissions presentation recorded and available on demand. But what we've also done is 2 to 3 minute bite-sized kind of, I call them explainer videos. So we're doing a little deeper dive into what is holistic review. What does it mean to test optional? How do we select class? So more of that on-demand content that's shorter and available to them when they want it, kind of just in time. So that's one of our strategies moving into the fall. We've been working on those this summer, and they're available online. But I definitely don't see a 30-minute watching full start to end with the prospective pre-application audience. The other thing actually that came up in a strategy discussion the other day was, if you do have those 30-minute videos, somehow indicating at what times certain content is available. So if you don't want to make the smaller little 2 to 3 minute video, at what point in the longer video can you find the information that you're seeking? I think that's a great strategy as well, or tactic.
Smart. That's smart. And this kind of dovetails nicely, Laura, into some work that you all do with you have virtual sessions that you've promoted throughout the summer and those sorts of things. Typically not live, right? Recorded with a chat element. How does that number kind of influence your decision making with that type of content? Your constantly available info session type content.
So it's huge. I mean, it's going back to the data. I think I'm going to say data a lot. We might say pivot. We've all said it now once, but data is huge. And so taking what you get after your content airs and seeing how long are they engaging, what are they actually watching, and what parts are they chatting with us, and what questions are they asking, tailors what the content is we come up with. So for example, we have every day from 8 to 5, 9 to 5 we have a daily chat where they can talk to an admissions counselor. Now we're having it where they actually want to talk to the student. And so our student-to-student engagement is a lot higher. So we've changed those hours so that they can actually talk to the students more. We actually changed our webcast content. So it was actually our admissions counselors and some of our academic units providing the content. We saw an increase when we switched to student-student engagement. So when the students were given the tidbits, they watched longer, they engaged more than it was one of us professionals providing the content. So I think we've learned that not only it needs to be shorter, but it also needs to be tailored to what the data is telling you. So if the data is telling you need to go later in the evening, you change it so that they're getting the content when they need it live. Or if you need to do it simu-live, if they're watching at 10 o'clock at night, they still have access on demand. So,
got it. So Andy, I'll pivot to you. I'll say pivot again. One of the other stats that came up was 44% of the content that was produced in the spring was either on demand or simulated live or simu-live pre-recorded content, right? And I know your program that you developed relied on a healthy volume of that, right? And I know you talked about this a little bit, but let's talk about this a little bit deeper about the structure of that content and the value of that. And then again, thinking about the fall, is it on demand and simulated live content? It's going to go up, going to go down, stay the same? What are your thoughts there on how that would work in your strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the spring, we had all told probably 80 different offerings, ranging from 3-minute pre-recorded sessions to 20-minute pre-recorded student panels. I think one of the nice things about pre-recorded content, if done well and if done live, it's just as authentic as if it's being live streamed. But you also free yourself up to using the entire time. I know someone asked in the questions, how did you allow for the pop-in 5 minutes to spare questions? Because the presenters were live in the chat while their recorded presentation was going. So we actually had the full 30 minutes, 45 minutes, hour allotted to answer questions. And so one of the things I think we've all found during this time, especially webinars like this, the value tends to be getting your actual question answered. and getting an answer in a timely fashion, which is why I try to go to the Q&A. Like you have to engage people with the content they want when they want it. I think that only is accelerating in this environment where everything's virtual. So on-demand content is huge. So we benefit from having a fantastic marketing communications team that's built up a lot of collateral over the years. I visited, a few peer institutions' websites, and I just saw a live tour from 2012. And it's great that you have a live tour, but I mean, in terms of what people are seeing, in terms of content, whether it's new or whether it's 3 years ago, I think a lot of this lies on us being relevant and timely, because everything has changed. There's pre-March 2020 and there's post-March 2020, and so it's okay for us to use content prior to that. It's where people are at in their, for lack of a better phrase, their shopping cycle. So, like I mentioned before with applications, we are dealing with a wide range, probably wider than ever before, of people in terms of where they're at in their shopping stage in the college search, right? You have people who feel like they haven't even gotten to engage with their college counselor and build that list junior year. And so they're stumbling through the process, trying to get back connected with school resources, find external resources, or go it alone. Then you have other people who were ready to apply ED sophomore year. They knew where they were going. They've had their plan. They've done all the steps, and they largely weren't impacted to the same extent as some of their peers. And so you have everything in between. And then you have people who might throw WPI on the list because they've heard of us, they love robotics, they know we're the first robotics program in the country, but they need to learn a little bit more about us. And then you have the students who participated in our pre-collegiate programs during the academic year in the summer, for the past 8 years. And they want to apply ED. They heard we added ED through the grapevine this year, so you've got to deal with all those populations. And so for me, it's looking at in the fall, we typically did a very few types of activities and we scaled them, right? Like 1,000 high school visits for my team, up to 50 college fairs, hundreds of off-campus interviews, hundreds more on-campus interviews, but not a whole lot of variation beyond that. Like that is just what we do, wash, rinse, repeat. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we have this broad range of people who are all over the map in terms of what they need, when they need, and how they want to digest it. And so we've really gone for the which means we're scaling back individual school support. We're not eliminating it, but we're probably at half. We're cutting college fairs probably by 80% in terms of virtual college fairs. So, we've been able to, thankfully, Massachusetts has really handled this pandemic well. So we were able to offer limited on-campus visits for some students over the summer, and we will in the fall, from a small geographic region, but we're meeting demand there. We're doing virtual student-led tours, virtual information sessions, virtual academic sessions, virtual interviews, virtual open houses, live chat, virtual panels, and then peer-to-peer engagement online. So a whole number of activities we would normally do. So we can get someone the 10-minute content to say, tell me a little bit more about WPI, what's distinctive. And we can have 2 hours of programming in our on-campus events for those students who want to drill down deeper. And we also have those pre-recorded academic sessions from the spring where, students can get a feel for faculty members, the program, if they're a little bit further along in their cycle, and engage again in that individual chat. And so that will require us to reformulate our spring offerings in 2021, just because we want to have differentiated content. But right now it's really about meeting students and families where they're at, which is probably more challenging in this environment than it ever has been before.
It's great points, and I think that transition us well to start talking a little about applying the lessons we learned from the spring from a content perspective and a cadence perspective. I see a question about from Cynthia about how do we market such a high number of virtual events, and I think we'll cover that when we talk about how we're going about building a virtual calendar and a strategy for these types of programs. But I think one of the biggest lessons that we learned, and we said this before, is that you simply can't just duplicate in-person events online, right? And with that in mind, there's a lot of ways of going about the things that we've traditionally done in the fall virtually, right? We have virtual college fairs all over the place now, Zoom visits, rep visits, scheduling individual events and programs. The challenge that and if you've been on any of our past webinars with Platform Q, and we've talked with many of our clients about, is how do we avoid the trap of trying to duplicate in-person events online when we learned that lesson in the spring that we can't do it that way. But we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us there's so many options and choices.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have been struggling with that and wrestling with, I see so many opportunities for us to leverage the technology to break down territories and expand our reach. And yet what I feel externally is pressure, and even some internal pressure, to continue to do the high school visits. The comment was made to me that, that the team is customizing these presentations such that they have to go to this particular high school because it's a special presentation. And the reality is, I'm amongst friends, I'll say it, it's not that customized. It's an admissions overview, right? It's a presentation about the University of Washington. So certainly if we're in-state, out-of-state, there's some customization. But, I'm just curious. It's interesting to hear you, Andy, say that, doing less when actually I feel like we're being asked, because there are no boundaries, there's no travel costs, to do more. In fact, a colleague in Hawaii was saying, I'm excited for my high school because I'm going to be able to have more reps meet my students, because historically they wouldn't fly to Hawaii, but now in this environment, there's a possibility. So how do you all, or how are you, I guess, wrestling with maybe some of those external pressure to continue business as usual in a virtual environment when there's a lot of opportunity to not?
Well, at UMKC, our counselors won't be physically traveling anywhere. So we've had to open up, what are the possibilities? How are we going to engage? And so we've been reaching out to our counselors and we've had pretty good relationships with our counselors in our territories. And so we're reaching out to them and saying, hey, depending on what their high school options are, what are your needs? A lot of them come back to us and said, we just want them to have general information about how to apply, whether they're a junior or a senior, what is the application process? So we put together a content for College Planning 101. Of course, it's UMKC branded, but it's just the basics, and they can go in. I'm gonna be honest, I came up with the thought of, we just want it to be where you have a substitute teacher. You can go in and click our Rooflix on demand. What do you need? What content do you need for your class today? And then go to our platform and get that content. But when it comes to determining on where our recruiters are going, what fairs are engaging in, and so a lot of the high schools that say, right now one of my counselors might have 6 virtual visits in one day, where they might only have done 4 high schools that day. And then they're sitting in a Zoom room from 9 to 3, and it's like, is that really the best use of their time? Is it really them being live and sitting there asking the questions? So it's key. It's taking that data to these counselors. It's taking that data to our leadership that's saying, well, how many fairs are you doing? Can we do more virtual fairs? It depends on what the content is, because if you're not getting any exposure, I was talking to Gil about this the other day, or maybe today, my days are blurred, that if you sign up for a virtual fair and you're not guaranteed a student is going to show up, but you pay $500 for exposure when you don't know that the students are going to show up and you have no access to their information, was that really the best use of your time and money? And that's where your question's coming in, is what is the most beneficial for your team and impactful? Because like Dixie, my colleague, said, it's yield time right now. So we got to make sure we're using our time effectively. And you might have some people that want to give you pushback, like their lunchroom visit, everyone's favorite. Obviously we're not doing those. And so if that's all they have, then what other ways can I engage with your students? And some of them are open to, oh yeah, we can have them come in and watch a Rooflix on demand. We'll come in and we can sign up for something virtual. So it's about being open and kind of pushing a little bit with the data that you have to help make those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think about my first year in admissions when I was a young admissions counselor, and I was sent to the public high school in Hartford. I had no clue, right? I just graduated my undergrad, and I was just doing what I was told. And it was a cafeteria fair. Nobody came. It was me and 4 other schools. It was to me, it was like, what am I doing wasting my time here, right? So I marched into my director's office and I said, we really don't need to go to that program next year. And I actually got yelled at, but it was for a valid reason, right? Like or at least the purpose of going to those programs was we need to visit every school in our local area, right? And if that's the opportunity, that's the opportunity, even if it's not feeling like the best use of my time. It was for the optics, right, of the, where the private institution, local outreach, all that sort of stuff. And so we needed to do it. And ideally, you're providing the opportunity to actually reach students in the school, but that wasn't the format to make that happen. If we were really serious about reaching students there, we would think of a different format to host and work. But I think what I believe is that many of our high school counselor friends are trying to do the things that they're most familiar with, but do it in a virtual format, right? Which we know it is not necessarily going to translate well, or worse, it's going to burn out our staff. And we talk a lot about, you mentioned Laura, you mentioned cafeteria visits. When my second year in admissions, when I was recruiting in a different territory, and the only thing that I was offered was a cafeteria visit, I said, oh well, my schedule doesn't work at that time. I'll drop off materials, and I visited other schools, right? Because I don't want French fries thrown at me in the cafeteria. I want to be spending time doing what I need to do. And so I would consider like the format of back to back Zoom sessions all day, doing the same thing over and over again, kind of like the 2020 version of cafeteria visits, right? Where if you're doing that, that's time spent not doing other things that might be higher impact, especially in a perpetual yield cycle. If we're in a perpetual yield cycle where we need to focus on building the better relationships with prospects. So, if colleges didn't do cafeteria visits, high schools would stop doing them, right? And so why can't we do the same? Like, we have the same conversation. And Andy, I'd love your input here. If we think about that from the virtual perspective, how do we, as the admissions side of things, help best serve students while also not kind of ostracizing our high school our high school counselor colleagues?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things. It's relationships and value. So I think leveraging relationships that we have with school counselors. So when we get that request, we're thinking about who are the schools that I could ask this colleague to potentially be partnering with, so we can get some scale, and specifically trying to take a lens to the concerns that we have across the board in terms of equity, in terms of those schools that don't typically get, the visits, whether it's because they're too physically remote, or whether it's because it's a lower income school and schools have tried to target, families with an ability to pay. And I think there are issues that we've grappled with as a field, and this is an opportunity for us to try to do well by doing good. And so trying to leverage those relationships we have to say, hey, would you mind if I reached out to a couple other schools? I'm going with your date, your time, but could we open this up to a few more schools? And you provide that scale, and you provide greater access. And then on the flip side, I think it's on us, right? I think WPI is partnering with some other great institutions that are STEM focused or nationally recognized in STEM fields. And we're doing, group virtual travel and trying to create value there, because we know that, while people might wonder, oh, do I add WPI or Drexel onto my list of 30 other schools? They're great schools, but there's only so many Zooms my students will do. Oh, they've got 6 of these schools, and they're all maybe a little bit in, maybe the high school is a secondary or a tertiary territory, but that's how you can create some value in these programs and also bring in some scale. And so getting back to individual programs we have, I think, we have the opportunity, like we're trying to do at WPI, to create some new, exciting, engaging content that maybe will replace the need for that high school visit. And so trying to get the word out about that, so that, there are more offerings, but then when we're doing some of these traditional things, it's looking to try to scale them and add value for folks on both sides of the conversation.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I was just going to add, I appreciate hearing everyone's feedback and approach to how to manage this. And we're trying to leverage the technology. So something we're going to try, because we want, the whole purpose of managing a territory in a high school is to Andy's point, the relationships, right? Like, we want to establish that. And so how do we replicate that in a digital environment? And so our attempt this year will be to use one of our instances within Platform Q to have subpages for all the counselors. So for those of you listening who are clients, you'll understand this, but you could do the same thing on, the website. You have counselor pages, you've got their videos, their contact information, their Calendly links, etc. You can do that on your website, or you can do it in the platform. And that's what we're going to try. So we can try to engage, try to establish relationships with the students that are served by that particular admissions counselor, and then hopefully get away from all these one-off presentations to respond to the demand. The other thing, I just have to totally do a little plug here. Because there are so many virtual events and fairs, I serve as the Pacific Northwest ACAC College Fair co-chair. I think it's really important for us on the college side to really be intentional about who we're partnering with and finding ways to leverage those organizations that are hopefully reaching a large audience as well. So sorry, thanks for letting me plug for that.
Hey, there you go. And I think that brings up the comment, especially about like a fair environment, right? And I mean, we at Platform Q, we have experience in running virtual college fairs in the past. And one of the challenges is you can't please everybody in a giant, large fair format, just like you can't in an in-person fair format. So why we want to replicate the large in-person fair format online when that doesn't even have the best format is bizarre, but that's beside the point. The challenge is, when you have 600 schools on a virtual fair, the ones that get the attention are the ones that, have the national recognition, that they have the school playing football or maybe someday playing football on Saturdays during the NCAA tournament every year, those sorts of things. But the schools that need the visibility and the traffic are oftentimes kind of buried in the alphabetical list, or they're just not discoverable, right? And so the challenge then is, I think that you keeping it to a manageable size of institutions where students can actually discover and not be overwhelmed, right? You walk into one of the NACAT college fairs in person, and it's a giant expo hall. You don't know where anybody is. You go into your local high school college fair, much smaller number, but then you don't have the access to everybody because not everybody came, right? So it's a hard balance to drive for. So what I will do is I'll kind of open this up to the questions and answer box, and I think there's a lot of great conversation going on in the chat window as well. Brittany had a question, and I'm not sure because I think all of us kind of work in the undergrad side, but there's visibility into graduate recruitment specifically. I think there's a lot of parallels, in my opinion, with graduate student outreach and opportunity for scale in that respect. But anyone have thoughts with a graduate audience specifically, and how we might be able to adapt and evolve? I mean, given the audience is different, but the vehicles are going to be oftentimes the same. So any thoughts, Alora, on that?
I would just say, go to your data. Go to see what the content, your most common questions, your most common things when it comes to students that you're trying to attract to university. And then you can help develop what your plan is for how you're going to develop your pages. Are they going to be on if you are a Platform Q client, are you going to put them on one of your instances so that they can go and watch that content? Right now, we still have our chat widget. It goes to whether you're an undergraduate, FTC, or a graduate student. So you can ask your questions there. They are able to go watch the content right now if they so choose. But I think, yes, the vehicles are going to be the same. It's just tailoring it. Maybe you add another instance so that they can have specific content for the graduate programs that you offer. But go to your data before you come up with what that plan looks like.
Any other thoughts, or generally in agreement there? I'm seeing nods. So we can, I think there's a question I really want to make sure gets answered from Aaron. And I think that Jocelyn, this is a great one for you. I work for a large university, and our open house event highlighted everything on campus. Any advice on explaining this shift, balancing relationships, as you mentioned before, not wanting to offend colleagues that are passionate about their programs, wanting or needing or feeling like they need to be involved, but if we're adjusting the content, how do we best balance that transition from the everybody all hands on deck in-person open house to that virtual experience, especially again thinking about how we're going to apply lessons from the spring to the fall?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. Yes, I work at a large institution, but no, I don't always have support from all the programs wanting to participate. In fact, it can feel like the opposite at times. So we do a fair amount of coercing and encouraging folks to participate. But I would say this is where you leverage the on-demand, right? So if there's a particular program or department that's really eager to get in front of students, how can you support? They can provide a recorded video. You can offer to advertise that to students who've demonstrated interest in that particular academic area of interest, or depending on what kind of data you have. And then it's not like, so for us, we don't want to waste time of our colleagues across campus. So that's why the on-demand, the simu-live, the recorded with the chat, that can be scheduled in advance. And I think those are great options, especially for some of the smaller programs, be a good use of their time and meet needs of prospective students.
Awesome. And Renee had some good input when you were talking about counselor pages on the platform. They do it for student ambassadors as well. And so at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, we'll give them a shout out. They definitely encourage you to check out what they're doing, because they do some great things on making their ambassadors accessible. So now you've got the counseling staff and ambassadors available. And that transitions me to one of the earlier questions that I apologize, Jacqueline, we didn't get to earlier. But for Andy specifically, when you were talking earlier about administrators engaging with students and families, what does that look like virtually? And I think first, if we could start with what you did for your admitted student program in the spring, and then maybe how that might apply to what you're putting together for the fall.
Yeah, so in terms of the administrators specifically, we went with a live administrator panel. I think that one of the important aspects of that being live was just it being an authentic give and take with the actual people had in the, I think, health and safety and wellness of students and of your parent of your children. That's always a top concern in these sort of panels, and never more so than now. So we felt that was really important to be live, just as much for the parent sort of peer-to-peer affirmation of, okay, I'm not the only person with this question or this concern. And you also have the benefit of not just normalizing the questions, but also getting everyone to hear the same type of answer and getting the same accurate, clear information from people who, while you can't necessarily look them eye to eye, you're seeing them in their homes. Like you're seeing them in a living room and kitchen. You're seeing them forget to unmute themselves. It's a very human interaction, and when you're trying to get at something that is of the utmost importance, I think some of that humanity really helps. It's something that is easy to lose in the transition from in-person to virtual, and so that sort of goes hand in hand with another question that was in the chat there that asked about, on-demand videos or pre-recorded videos. Did you do these professionally or internally? We literally, for academic sessions, we let our professors just do that. We had one person, with a really dated-looking PowerPoint. It wasn't our first choice, but the personality just came out, right? And that's what matters. There's content, there's personality. You're trying to get a sense for that. And so trying not to overly polish something and let people be themselves, I think that's a really critical aspect of this process, especially when it comes to the faculty and the students that people are going to be engaging with for their 4 years on campus. So when we look to the fall, I think more of the same, but also different options. And so I went through a whole laundry list of things we're trying to do. We just really tried to anticipate for each sort of persona, the person who's just hearing about WPI in September, October, the person who's known about WPI their whole life, and everything in between, 3 or 4 different personas, and just try to think, what is the programming that they need in this moment, or that would really help them understand WPI and how we differentiate our educational experience from our peer institutions. And so that's how we tried to approach our programming. And by decoupling it from things like open houses, that right there helps you cut down on the length of programming, because you just have snippets. And so we've decided to go with sort of a traditional, shorter, 2.5, 3 hour open house format this fall. But it's only for certain types of people who are looking for that experience. And so there'll also be an agenda for people to pop in when they want. But most of our content is decoupled and ranges from 3 minutes to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 to an hour.
I just have to admit that it's accurate. You have to be authentic in your content and what makes you and your university stand out and what makes you unique, because we all have an admissions overview. We all have the open houses, but if you're not authentic and paying attention to the data, you can go off. So I mentioned earlier in this webinar that we had 100% student that engaged with us last year, enrolled last fall. And we're up to 89% this year, anyone that watched or visited our content. And I think that's partly because we switched our lens. We went with professionals giving the content to our students and our faculty being the ones that are the ones giving the content. And if you are trying to, we can, admissions counselors can tell you, but if it's not the person that's doing it every day that can be themselves and give you that content, it doesn't come off as authentic and they're not as engaged to continue engaging with you. So thank you, Andrew, that was dead on.
Yeah, I think just to add to that point, I mean, it sounds cliche, but there's a lot of cliches on in higher ed nowadays, but it's, you know, I think what the pandemic did was, and I've said this before on a podcast or whatnot, but what it did is it kind of forced a lot of us to do what we've known for 10 years that we should be doing, which is create that more authentic content, because we had no other choice. We have students at their homes on a webcam is the only option that we had. But that's really what people are looking for. One of my favorite webcasts that I saw in the spring was a student who was in her closet because her brother was running around in the hallway and she didn't want she didn't want her brother to interrupt the presentation or whatever. I would have paid money to listen to Andy's kids sing Into the Unknown in the background during the opening of the presentation today. But that I think is a great point from some of that, or from everyone on content. Jocelyn, anything you want to add on the content production piece? Because I know your event had a combination of a lot of pre-recorded content and live content, some of which was produced, and others was personal. So I'll let you kind of chime in there.
Yeah, it's funny. So I report to our director of admissions, but I also report to our AVP for brand strategy. So marketing and brand standards are very near and dear to my heart. So I cringe a little bit thinking about and knowing some of the content that we've put out, but we're living through a pandemic. So we're doing the best that we can. We had some pre-recorded, polished videos that had been done professionally, and so we used them. And then we had to create new content, so we used what was available. But all that to say, I agree with the authenticity. I think that's critical, and particularly to Andy's point around the administrators. You know, we had a welcome from a VP, and he literally walked over, turned on the camera, and hello, I'm Ed. You know, it was so sweet and so sincere. And it's just the world that we're living in right now, and I think people get that, and there's a little more grace around some of that roughness that you might see.
Awesome. So we're getting close to our time. There's a few questions that are in the chat or in the Q&A. I would recommend throwing them in the chat. I'll hop over there after the webcast. We've got members of our team and a vibrant community of people participating in it right now. So we can brainstorm around things like parent program, adult learners, and those sorts of things. So we'll go in the order of the intros, and then I'll bring it home at the end. Final thoughts on what you learned in the spring, but forward thinking. Laura, we'll start with you on advice for the group on how to adapt and evolve while we're, as Jocelyn said, living through a pandemic.
I mean, our theme for today couldn't have been any better. It's the perfect theme. We are going into the unknown territory. We don't know what to expect, but what we do know is that we can't go back to how it was before. There is no more only doing the high school visit with the lunch visit. There is no more just non-digital, and it's non-webinar platform. So I think what we learned from the pre-COVID and COVID is that being authentic is going to be key, and being strategic and using your data to help you make wise decisions and supporting what you and your teams are doing. So when your chancellor or your leadership is saying, hey, I want you in every high school in the state of Missouri next year, where every school is back open, what does that really mean? And taking the data and showing, look, we had a webinar, we had 300 students attend this live event, and they were chatting with us, versus sitting in an hour and a half lunchroom visit where you have French fries thrown at you, or you get to watch the hot gossip of the day, and that's it. They don't even come talk to you. So being strategic and being more impactful with your time, I think, is how we move into this new territory, this new era, and working with our counterparts, working with our counselors on helping them understand and helping us understand what the true needs are and how we move forward with them.
Andy, how about you?
Yeah, I'll say, you know, the pandemic and what it's done to our traditional business is somewhat of an opportunity. You know, what we do in this field is so iterative and isomorphic. I mean, it's what did we do last year? How do we tweak it? What are our peers doing? How do we make sure we're keeping up with the Joneses? And so, you know, this has been a real opportunity to take a step back and say, throw it all out. Like, let's pull up a Zoom, maybe with some breakout rooms. Let's get some really smart people together. Let's lean on their expertise. Let's talk to people who are going through this process right now. And then let's also think about our own experiences during the pandemic. When you try to reach out to your health insurance company and they're like, oh, sorry, like, we're not answering the phone right now. You're like, okay. You know, like, think about those things just as a human being. What do you need in this environment? And then to the extent you can create either personas or really categories of need, and try to develop content and allocate your resources to the things that matter in this environment.
The only thing I would add to that is, you know, I think we're all trying to do the best that we can with what information we have when we look back, and knowing that it's going to be a little bit different this fall. But I do spend a lot of time wondering. I mean, we've added so many things into our toolkit, right? And so, how are we going to sustain that when we're out of the pandemic, right? Because that will be the expectation to some degree. And I also wonder a lot about what will the expectation from the consumer, the student, the family be? Will they demand live and on-streaming content when we're also in person? Will they demand or expect a virtual experience in all circumstances? I don't know. And I don't know how our campus, my campus, is going to be able to accommodate some of that. But those are some of the things I've been thinking about. But we're not there yet. We gotta get through 2020. So
that's a great segue to my point. And thank you all for your time and expertise, and the attendees for the great conversation. I guess to round it out with the Frozen 2 theme for those who have seen the film. You know, when the future is unknown, you can just do the next right thing, right? And so we don't know what post-pandemic is going to bring with respect to expectations and what we're going to be doing. I think my prediction is there's no going backwards, at least with the virtual content. I think it's more to Jocelyn's point about what that balance looks like, because are we going to do the one-to-one high school visits over and over and over again when we've learned a way to not have to do it that way, right? And so I think, you know, great insights from everyone. Look forward to seeing how all of these programs come together. Appreciate everyone's time, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.